Hello, you're watching Context. I'm Orkan Amashov here, as usual, to ask relevant and pertinent questions in pursuit of illuminating answers. And indeed, today is one of those days when one needs actually a bit of illumination, for the subject before us is not only complex and intricate by nature, but also portentous with consequences that may prove hideous if not properly managed. Indeed, Israel and Iran are no longer trading threats or barbed diplomatic rebukes as they have done for decades. They are now engaged in direct, active military confrontation, stopping just short of a full-scale war. On the 13th of June, Israel launched unprecedented ballistic missile strikes on Iran, targeting its nuclear program, including scientific installations, facilities and key personnel, the brightest and principal nuclear brains of the nation, and also senior military and intelligence commanders and figures. This, of course, marked a turning point in the long-simmering enmity between these two nations and powers. Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have described the current operation as the inception of a point of no return and an extended campaign expected to last weeks, as Israeli officials are saying. And they're also saying that they will continue as long as it takes, as long as Israel achieves its purpose. We shall return to that notion of purpose shortly, and to the question of whether Israel can in fact achieve this purpose without external succor, external support. Iran, for its part, has responded forcefully, at points even penetrating the Iron Dome and somewhat damaging the image of Israeli invincibility. Scenes of destruction in Tel Aviv and other cities of Israel have prompted renewed questions about whether Israel can withstand the humanitarian cost of inflicting further damage upon Iran. And in this escalating drama, US involvement is absolutely critical. Without Washington's participation, both in military and logistical sense, it is widely accepted that Israel will not be able to meet its objectives in a conclusive manner. Israel needs US bunker buster bombs to penetrate and destroy Iran's forwarded nuclear facility. The US, in the person of President Donald Trump, called for a complete give-up by Iran, suggesting that they even know everything about Iranian officials, including the supreme leader, about his whereabouts. And this was perceived as an act ramping up pressure on Tehran to the level unheard before. And of course, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself, in a national address, in a manner which was very defiant and very conclusive, stated that Iran is not one to surrender, and any military intervention on their part, in reference to the United States, will undoubtedly result in irreparable damage. Many believe that if President Donald Trump decides to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, this will open what they call Pandora's box, with consequences that will not be just very difficult to predict, but also contain, in particular when it comes to the countries in Iran's immediate vicinity, that is the South Caucasus. But of course, the roots of this conflict between Iran and Israel goes back to the 1979, when the Pahlavi monarchy failed, and after its crumbling moment, of course, a new government there developed a completely different position regarding Israel. And it's also a long forgotten fact that Iran, under the Shah, was the second Muslim majority country after Turkey to recognize Israel's independence and sovereignty. But since the revolution, of course, in 1979, the Islamic Republic has maintained unwavering rejection of Israel's legitimacy. And that position, it goes without saying, remains unchanged to this day. And today, joining me to discuss this very complex issue, as I said, with possible implications which could potentially be hideous, from Athens, Greece, Mehmet Ögücü, former Turkish diplomat, OECD executive and noted commentator on geopolitics, a man of great influence in Turkey and beyond. And from Brussels, I'm pleased to welcome Vlad Alteanu, political analyst and senior EU legal and policy expert, a man whose articles have shaped debates surrounding many intricate matters involving EU and beyond. Well, welcome to both of you.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Pleasure to join you.
Thank you. Mr. Alteanu, I would like to begin with you. So with a question on legality and legitimacy. The scale and scope of Israel's strikes are, by any measure, extraordinary. Nothing of the kind has happened over the past decades. And in terms of international law, do you think Israel has a problem with legitimacy? Because Israel argues that this is a defensive and preemptive act. And interestingly enough, when I listened to what Ursula von der Leyen, EU Commission President, said earlier, they said that, of course, they recognize Israel's right to self-defense, And evidently this right to self-defense extends to Israel's actions regarding Iran. But they said that diplomacy is a right course of action. And then, of course, German Chancellor said something extraordinary yesterday. He said that Israel is doing the dirty job for all of us. What do you make of this overall position maintained by European Union?
Yeah, I think you notice very, very well there is a position of the European Union, and then there are positions of the parts thereof, of Germany, of France, and of other member states. I think very clearly put, from an international public law point of view, such an action should have been validated by the Security Council of the United Nations. We should have had a resolution in that sense. Of course, that is the theory. In practice, a number of permanent members probably would have opposed. So we'd have had at least one, if not two vetoes in the Security Council. So Israel probably made a calculation there, thinking, we're going to go in that situation alone, we can do it, and we will have support in the defense. And I think here clearly the European Union position is defense, yes. So defending the territory of Israel, yes. Offense, no. You mentioned what the German Chancellor said. And there is, I think, a general perception that any nuclear development in military terms is very worrisome for the European Union and for the world probably, but for the European Union for sure. If we remember during the conflict in between India and Pakistan, which was a very short conflict, I'm not sure it's, for the moment it is part. I'm not sure it is resolved though. During that period, the European Union diplomacy was very, very active indeed to try to mediate as much as possible. Why? Because we had there the possibility of a longer conflict in between two nuclear powers. So whenever there is nuclear military use, there is a lot of nervosity in the Union. The Union wants to find a diplomatic solution or help find a diplomatic solution. In this case, it is not clear, though, although Iran developed really nuclear military applications, or although they were near to develop one, as Israel has said, as President Trump has alluded to, but as his head, yes, of intelligence denied.
Yes,
so it is very interesting to know, was that a civil use, or was that already a military, or getting very near to a military use? In any event, even if that would have been the case, still it would have been preferable to have a mandate from the Security Council for such an action.
Because there is a degree of uncertainty regarding Iran's nuclear program, and we're not really entirely sure that the rationale behind Israeli actions is purely driven by that very moment. Maybe there are some other extra nuclear elements that seem to guide current actions taken by the government of Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Oguchi, in your recent article, you warned of the regional implications and ramifications of such an escalation, and you, if memory serves me correctly, described what is happening now as a potentially transformative turning point, describing Turkey itself as at the crossroads of power and prudence. So, on the basis of what you have written and what you think now, from Turkey's vantage point, what are the principal risks?
Before coming to Turkey, may I also say a few words about your first question?
Absolutely.
First of all, about the legitimacy and legacy, whether it complies with the UN Security Council rules. I think we have to put all these concepts which we held in high regard in the past aside. Because in today's world, it's not the international law, it's not sovereignty, it's not human rights. What matters is the power you have. And you exercise this power with great force. As we have seen in the case of Russia, occupying South Ossetia, Abkhazia, then in Ukraine, annexing Crimea, now Donbass, the war is going on. Tomorrow, perhaps China will act to claim Taiwan and else. So in today's world, we have to recognize international law is put aside. It is what power you have, military, economic muscles, and economic sanctions, trade, high tariffs, technology warfare, and we know all of them. Therefore, we are not talking about the normal international order in which law was held in high regards. We are in a different world.
Mr. Ögüç, I'm terribly sorry for
judge on the basis of
terribly sorry, just one moment, if I may, with your permission. So, from the point of view of international law, the way you, as a distinguished diplomat, understand this particular moment, Israel's right to self-defense in this particular context does not actually extend to a unilateral attack aimed at Iran's nuclear facilities. This requires certain procedural process. Please.
Not at all. Not at all. It doesn't apply to that. If it applies, it also gives Iran the right to strike back, because Israel also has nuclear facilities which are not controlled by International Atomic Energy Agency. Yeah. For that matter, not only Iran, but any country in the region might feel threatened by Israel's having nuclear power and military installations. Therefore, now we are at a stage, because also we have seen from Israeli actions, it hasn't stopped where their legitimate security interests lie. Gaza, then Hezbollah, and then moving on from Lebanon to Syria, occupying part of Syria as well, and then bombing at its will any facilities, military bases in Iraq and Iran, now nuclear facilities. So therefore, I don't think that international law could justify that. And as I said initially, it's already put aside, not by only Israel, but so many countries. On the second issue, where some of the Western countries, as well as the Arab nations in the Gulf, feel somehow satisfied that Israel is doing their job, because they didn't want Iran to extend its irredentist aims, designs to Lebanon, and then to Gaza, Yemen, and elsewhere, because Iran was pushing very hard and disturbing the regional balance and stability. Therefore, most of these countries in the region feel somehow relaxed that Israel is doing the job that they wanted themselves to do, but they were unable to do so. But this is putting aside all the atrocities, the humanitarian concerns we have in Gaza, Lebanon, and elsewhere. In terms of hard power politics, I think most Arab nations were quite happy that Iran power was somehow reduced significantly in the region, pushed back. So that's as far as the Israel is doing other countries' job, and international law, whether it justifies or not, these are two separate questions. I'm talking about the realpolitik, the conditions that exist as it's now, fait accompli is achieved, and US also, they say they want to have Canada as a 52nd state. They want to invade Iceland, Panama. So they want to turn Gaza into a Riviera of the Middle East. So these are other indications that international law will not persist in our current time. So we have to, as diplomats, as realists, and as politicians, we have to understand that. So I think judging it on the basis of whether it complies with international law, UN Security Council resolutions, is something else. With regard to Turkey, you asked the question. Yeah. First of all, I think Turkey feels that if Israel feel at ease to strike as it wishes such facilities, this is a dangerous trend. Nobody knows where it might lead to. I don't think that Turkey will be under threat in the short to medium term, because Israel, I don't think, can dare to attack a country of Turkey's magnitude, militarily, economically, but historical relations, and also Turkey being a NATO member country. And Turkey also, leaving aside the humanitarian and other concerns, may feel somehow like other Arab countries relaxed, because Iran was following a policy in Caucasus, in Central Asia, in the Middle East, in the Gulf, which were quite dangerous. Shia Crescent, as they were calling it. And the other thing is that I think there was a unanimity of opinion in many countries, including within Iran, that this current regime has to go because it brought so much political troubles, it brought economic misery. Iran is isolated from the rest of the world. Since 1979, the country is sliding back in many regards, but the domestic opposition was not able to achieve anything in this regard. Whether the way to go, use a brutal military force from outside, of course, this cannot be condoned. But in realistic terms, and if it is going to bring a better Iran, economically prosperous, politically stable, and internationally reliable Iran will come to the fore as a result of these actions, then many people feel that perhaps this was a turning point. But this is optimistic, so you never know where it's going to lead. Perhaps the regime is not going to fall as easily as Israelis and Americans think it will, and there will be more bloodshed, more instability, moving forward for another decade or so. We don't know. Or there might be a very sudden change of government in Tehran, and you have a government quite secular and also working in close cooperation with the international community, come back to the civilized world, as we call it. Then this might be a huge breakthrough for Iran. But from what it looks, I think, the crisis will not be easily going away, and I don't think that it's going to be a smooth and trouble-free transition in Iran.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr.
We can discuss further. This will have serious implications for the energy industry as well.
Indeed, yes. We will slowly move into that realm about the implications for the energy realm, in particular bearing in mind Turkish interest, because as your article seems to suggest, I think that 15% of energy, domestic consumption of Turkey in terms of energy consumption actually is connected with Iran. And we'll come to that point as well. And also we are distinguishing between a couple of compartments here, of course. One is international law. What Israel is currently doing is not in line with international law. There is no unanimous international support. There are some elements of support coming from the European countries, and even those politicians who support seem to kind of support Israel. They're saying that diplomacy is the right course of action. This is one thing there, and also when it comes to what extent it genuinely Iran constitutes a danger to Israel is another question. And I think that it would be fair to say that in Israeli strategic mindset, any defense mounted by Tehran of its nuclear program is often dismissed as jiggery-pokery, as of the most disingenuous kind. And of course, there is an element of suspicion there. We need clarity and caution. And also, as your article seems to suggest, and of course we are referring to the reports made by international organizations, the uranium enrichment now surpassed 60%. So it's sort of approaching to what you described as the point where it will brush against that weapons-grade territory. So there is an element of real danger. But Mr. Altiani, I want to put my question to you. International law is one element. Extent of the perceived danger emanating from Iran, as long as Israel is concerned, is one element. Interest of the regional actors is one element. But in reality, do you think that the primary aim of the government of Benjamin Netanyahu is exclusively connected with Iran's nuclear program?
Well, I think there are a number of elements to it, for sure. So, first of all, I think clearly the Israeli government is at the moment where he decided that direct action is needed. Now, it is not the first time that Israel and Iran exchange missiles. There was an episode before. Here, clearly the decision was taken to go what they call till the end. So go to the end game, whatever that end game would be. Clearly, there is a decision made there that this is the moment. It may have internal considerations as well as Iran-related considerations. I think internal considerations would include the fact that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu was under a lot of criticism, especially from the EU member states, for its actions in Gaza. I think this is also a moment at which the narrative is changing because of the current war situation with Iran. I think we should not forget what happened before, but I think for the moment, EU governments are in a position more to help Israel than the previous condition in which they were increasingly critic about the government of Israel. Coupled to that, and I agree, there is international law and there is realpolitik, and what happens here is clearly realpolitik. I still believe that this is regretfully so, for a simple reason, is that in none of those situations, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Iran now, if the law of the strongest is the one applied, in none of those situations, winners could be found. Losers everywhere. Winners, no. And I think the European continent is very clear about it. At the end of the day, 2 world wars happened on the European continent, and they happened at various degrees, but for realpolitik considerations. So I think it is high time that we go back. I don't think that we are going to go back to international order anytime soon. I think this would require probably a very different US president to arrive there, and a different situation in the world, not just in the US. I do agree with that, but I think we need to get back there. Why? Because the alternative is extremely dangerous. And let's assume that the end game here of Israel is a change of regime in Iran. The likelihood of that regime to be a better one or a more stable one, let's put it this way, is very slim indeed. The Iranian opposition is not very united, and history shows us that wherever violence was used to change regimes in the region, and we can think about Iraq next door, we can think about Libya, we can think about the Maghreb countries as well, we can think about Tunisia. I do not think that those changes in regime were for the better in terms of stability. Of course, in terms of better regimes or more respectful for human rights, partially, probably so, partially, but only partially. But in terms of stability, we have destabilized quite significant parts of the region already. And let's not forget that in the same region, with that destabilization, we also had for some years the Islamic State, and everybody was fighting against the Islamic State there as well. So it's a very, very complex region, a very, very complex situation. I think Israel was taken here very clearly unilateral action based on their assessment of their own situation, based on the assessment of where Iran is and how bigger of a threat Iran has become for them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Altiano. It's a very complex subject, multi-layered subject, and there are so many elements that I would like to discuss with you. And of course, we are very concerned about this in the South Caucasus and Azerbaijan as well, because of a number of reasons, of course. Mr. Ogutchu, before just moving back to the regional scope, I would like to put you a question about the energy implications, which the substantial chunk of your article deals with that subject, and you mentioned about it. We know that for Turkey, this is a very sensitive moment. About, I think, as you say, 10 BCM of natural gas comes from Iran. It accounts for 15% of Turkey's domestic consumption. And there's one particular, I think, subtitle in your article which says that if Strait Hormuz closes, the world will suffocate, or something along those lines. And the prices, oil prices will go up to $150 per barrel. What is your evaluation of potential energy implications of what's happening now?
Well, we suffered already so many setbacks in the energy as a result of COVID and Russian-Ukraine war, which pushed the prices up and increased the inflation and reduced the competitiveness of the European Union markets especially. Now with this crisis, and of course Iran is not a major producer, but its natural gas fields might be affected. If it hits the Iranian oil gas facilities and infrastructure, I think Iran will retaliate the same way. So then Tamar and Leviathan fields will be in danger, and refineries as well. The real danger is if the Strait of Hormuz will be closed or mined by Iran as a retaliation, as a last resort. I mean, today ENI CEO was saying that we don't expect this to happen. But if Netanyahu say this is an existential threat for us, Iran, and if it becomes a life and death matter for the Iranian political and religious leadership, And if the US also gives more support to Israel, then perhaps they may use the last resort option, closing the Strait of Hormuz. That means almost 20% of the world's oil will not flow out of the Gulf, and then almost 20% of the LNG markets. Already the prices, in thinking that there might be such a risk, and the oil prices increase about 10, 12%, it might go, if the threat becomes materialized, up to 150, even $200 per barrel in oil. And with the LNG already increased almost 25% around the world, because most of the LNG coming from Qatar feeds the Asian markets almost percent, China, India, Japan, Taiwan, and Korea. So this is very serious in that regard. Almost a fifth of the world's oil and LNG will be wiped out from the market for a while. We can sustain it with our strategic reserves for a while, but if the crisis becomes so entrenched, it will be serious. For Turkey, a country which depends almost 98% in natural gas on imported gas, pipeline and LNG, and almost 96% in oil, it is going to be catastrophic. Any price increase, because Turkey already has a huge current account deficit, and this is going to go even bigger. And in such a time of volatile economic situation, this is bad news. But politically speaking, Ankara, or Turkey, is the largest power to reckon with, all the way from China to Germany, Russia to Saudi Arabia. Therefore, it's a neighbor to Iran. Then Turkey also cares about almost 25 million Iranians of Azeri origin there, next door neighbors. And also any leakage of radiation from the nuclear facilities to Turkey, especially eastern borders. These are catastrophic things for Turkey to consider. It's not only political, energy-wise, but also environment and security-wise. There will be migration of people flooding into Turkey, like it happened in Syria in the past. So these are serious matters. So you cannot sit on the margins, on the sidelines, and just watch and say, we invite both Iran and Israel to resolve their problems through diplomatic means, which will not happen, or call for the international law to prevail. This is not going to happen either. So there is a need for a country like Turkey, in partnership with other countries in the region, to have a very strong standing, coming with some solutions. Don't call for international law and diplomatic solutions. It's not going to happen, because Israel, US now having the upper hand.
We're kind of in the realm of practicable solutions, in a sense that we are in the realm of practicable solutions. Mr. Egici, thank you very much indeed. Just the months before, when we were discussing Iran, Israel, and Turkey, it was quite comfortable to discuss and actually make it very clear that considerably weakened Iran is not a bad thing for Turkey, of course. Ultimately, nobody in the region is interested in Iran acquiring nuclear capabilities. But now it seems that our focus on the humanitarian, imminent sort of consequences of what is happening. Mr. Altiano, my last question is going to be addressed to you very briefly, if I may. How do you evaluate the current challenge that countries in this region, in the South Caucasus, are currently facing? Azerbaijan made it abundantly clear that it will not allow for its territory to be used against any third party, including Iran. Azerbaijan has got very important strategic relationship, of course, partnership with Israel, but also it's normalizing its relations with Iran. So it seems that all countries here, including Armenia and Georgia, are very much concerned about it. But also, let's be very honest and clear about it. Any crisis also means an opportunity. So I'm saying it without any cynicism or anything of that kind. How would you just briefly evaluate the current juncture, maybe morality of the situation, if you like?
Yeah, it is a very difficult situation, clearly, for the neighbors. And in the first step, clearly the neighbors will suffer most. Because if there is a flux of people coming there, and clearly there will be if the situation lasts for weeks, that needs to be addressed. And that needs to be addressed properly. It was not an easy situation before. It is a much more complex situation now. Clearly, the countries near or nearer to the area would need to take some action. And I do agree that that action may be a pragmatic and realpolitik-based action. for now. It needs to be, because they will need to address a crisis situation fast, unless something will contradict us and this situation will be somehow fixed, military or otherwise, within days and not within weeks. If that would be the case, then we'll have probably a different situation. So let's hope so. Let's hope that we are not going to face the situation for weeks or for months, but rather for days.
Well, I'm very grateful to both of you, Mr. Oguchi and Mr. Altiano, for your analysis and for your reflections. Most grateful to both of you. Well, it's not merely a regional episode. What is happening in connection with Iran and Israel is of a global significance. This confrontation now holds the potential to reshape the whole landscape of the Middle East and beyond. And as many other developments that we have witnessed since later 2024, what's happening now is quite unprecedented. And the hope is that the fallout will not be too unpredictable and will be contained in a proper manner. You've been watching Context, and see you very soon indeed.